Well, I had a podcast yesterday. That wasn't a podcast, it was actually Forbes. So I was in an interview with Forbes. And like I said, I'm a solutionary guy.
Based on different podcasts that I've done, and I hear different strategies and things on the residential side and how people are scared of commercial world, especially because the interest rates are kind of high. And then on the note standpoint, you are always kind of refinancing. But what you're doing in this high interest rate market and creating value for yourself.
It was 960,000 was the annual rent roll divided by 0.04. Now that's 4% interest. Now your building's worth 24 million. When interest rates drop, you picked up another 10 million in value.
Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bigger Life Podcast. Today we have another awesome guest, Jeremy Barker out of Morgan, Utah. He is a former firefighter turned into a real estate investor and great inspiring stories. His investment journey from August of 2018 all the way to 2025 and beyond. Let's hear directly from Jeremy. Jeremy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing. How about yourself, Ray?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks for asking. So, Jeremy, you have an interesting story. So, before we dabble into real estate, what were you doing before and why real estate?
I was doing, a couple jobs. One, I started, I was a firefighter paramedic here in Weber County for a city called Royce City Fire. And started a company called Murphy Door, the Hidden Door Company, making secret rooms, bat caves, you name it, anything people want to hide or make a fun speaking point of their home. That's what we do mainly. And then, of course, our Murphy beds and our other Murphy lines. And then after that, as that company grew, I was forced into finding new space, more space to be able to handle the size of our company growth. And I've never invested in real estate outside of like single family dwelling for my own residence, right? So single family dwelling for me, personal residence. And I had this opportunity come up, and it was kind of a weird deal. This property is right in my response area. So it was right next door to a breakfast place we attended all the time. And it was this big fenced off 90,000 square foot, 5.5 acre lumber yard, a door factory. And not a hidden door factory, but just regular slab door factory. Had a rail spur. I mean, it was, in my eyes, where I hadn't owned real estate, it just looked like this massive piece of property and really tough to buy. And my realtor said, "Hey, you ought to buy this BMC property." And I'm like, "Yeah, right." And he came in and said, "It's $3 million. And to me, that number sounded astounding. Like, how in the Sam heck is a firefighter that's just starting a new company supposed to come up with $3 million? He convinced me to say, "Hey, let's do a long letter of intent, give us a long due diligence period." So we did 120-day due diligence, 90-day due diligence, 120-day to close. And in the meantime, I got on YouTube and started learning on how to buy commercial real estate. And fortunately found Grant Cardone, and he was telling stories on how he was financing apartment buildings and how they were being valued. This particular property had one small tenant, which was the remnants of a door division that they had inside this big property. So I had a small tenant, but I only needed a small portion of 90,000 square feet. Even though I needed bigger space, I didn't need that big a space. So gave me an opportunity to create a rent roll from other pieces. And looking at the way Grant had done his real estate, his was looking for high occupancy, say call 85 to 90% occupied, with a decent rent roll, but still gave room to increase revenue by increasing rent rates, which then changed the cap rate or the value of the property per se. And I kind of reversed engineered his mindset. I said, "Hey, look, well, if he's getting his property appreciation and value increase from increasing the tenant occupancy and rent roll from 90, let's call it 85 to 100, that increases the valuations of the property. And then he's getting it through rent increases. What if we had a building that had zero occupancy, giving me 100% opportunity in valuations?" Because what I didn't know in commercial real estate, when it's empty, is generally appraised at comparable empty properties, right? Because it's a true asset value, and like a house, right? Well, when it's an occupied property or you have rent rolls, then it's a cap rate based off net operating income. So what that means is whatever your rent rolls are minus your hard costs. So go into a little bit of detail, like a triple net lease gives you a lot more pure NOI than a gross lease, which becomes kind of convoluted. So in commercial real estate, gross leases mean that you rent the space for, you say you have 2,000 square feet for 2,500. $2,500 to cover your power, water, gas, taxes, everything inside that gross. There's also a modified gross. I mean, there's so many complicated ways you can do your lease. I do pure triple net leases where everything outside of the space is an addition: power, water, gas, maintenance, et cetera, on the outside, snow plow and striping and asphalt, all the things. So that way it keeps my net operating income really clean, right? So one thing I'd found, like this property came in and it appraised, we ended up getting it for 2.9 million, which was confusing to me because there was other properties that were actually smaller than that for sale on LoopNet at the time for much more money. And I'm like, this makes no sense to me. How is this building 2.9 and this building over here 15 million? It makes no sense. Well, then that's when I started understanding the multiple of cap rate, right? So I'm like, this is an opportunity for me now. When I did my letter of intent, I knew going in that I only needed a small amount of space, right? I just needed a small space for us, call it 20,000 square feet. The other 70,000 square feet was available. So I let them know, hey, look, when I sign this letter of intent, I want to be able to put it up for lease tomorrow using the next 120 days on their nickel to try to get occupants inside. And there was a little bit of a sales pitch in the middle. I had to let them know, look, hey, I only need 20,000 square feet. If we get the leases and we don't close, then these tenants need to be aware that the lease will be null and void, or they have to work out a deal with you guys. So when I did that, convinced them of it, and literally the day I put up my, for lease, we had people interested in leasing, which was really interesting. So what it made me aware of is when these buildings, that particular building had been for sale for like 3 or 4 years, right? So it was always for sale, not for lease. Well, when people are driving down through the neighborhoods and they see these buildings for sale forever, and sometimes they're huge, like this property in Michigan that I'm buying, 425,000 square feet on 55 acres. When it's for sale, it's one thing. When it's for lease, that means people could take some demisable space, have a little space. So you have a lot more opportunity there. Well, I ended up getting that property fully leased, committed prior to closing.
100%.
100% occupied, including property space, including the rail usage. So I had Union Pacific Railroad paying me like $3,500 a month to use the rail spur. I had LKL, I had Frontline Flooring, it was just awesome, and Murphy Door, and then BMC West as well. They ended up coming back, being bought out by Builders First Source, and they came back and said, hey, we want to lease actually more space. And I'm like, wow, holy cow. So now I went from zero, again, a $3 million valuation, 2.9. And then that before I closed, the property was worth 14.8 million based on net operating income of those leases marked at a triple net. So here's one of those opportunities. In that building, by the way, now it's worth 17.8 million with rent increases that I bought for 2.9 million.
That's a home run.
It's a home run, right? And that, keep this in mind. And I mean, for you listeners out there, it's not something that is a really, I guess, guaranteed risk, right? So I'm not a risk adverse guy, but when I draft these LOIs, the unique opportunity that when you put these LOIs together that give you permissions to put the buildings up for lease the day you sign the LOI, especially if you can get a long-tailed LOI, say 90-day due diligence period, that means you have 90 days to get the occupants if you decide, and I have my LOIs drafted that I can back out of any deal for any reason, right? It's up to 90 days. So if I don't have the occupants I need committed to cover my my base cost, then I can back out the purchase and say, all right, peace out. I'm out. I'm not doing that. So it gives me like very little risk if I don't close, right? That's the risk is you're not going to be able to pay that debt service on that kind of purchase, which I think on 3 million at the time was like $20,000 or something. So I just needed to come up with $20,000 and then splitting the triple net cost with all those tenants, I'm going to be okay. So that one was my first deal, man. And it was pretty crazy. I literally put $30,000 of my own money in to do the altas and the engineers, all the stuff. I did a little bit of hard money movement, and then the banks came in and valued my leases and gave me an increased deal. So initially I'd started with the SBA because they'll do up to 5 million. Really slow, by the way. The SBA is horrifically unproficient and inefficient, and most banks can move quicker, and they'll move quicker on a good lease deal. Anyway, long story short, I moved it to a local bank. I ended up getting $2 million at close within just a few months outside with my new values. It was pretty awesome. And my tenants were all, one of them was a Fortune 500, and so on. So it ends up really solidifying that document and making it so you have capital right out the gate. We had some remodel money. We had some stuff that we could really jump into. And then 2 years later, jumped into the same exact kind of deal, another 90,000 square foot on 5.5 acres off the freeway here in Ogden. Bought an old call center, bought it for initial asking price several years prior was like 10 million. It dropped to 6 million. It went to 4 million. I put an offer at 2.9 million. It moved back to 3 million. During my due diligence period, I'd found that all the rooftop units had the copper stolen. So I got a $600,000 credit at close for the heating and air. So I ended up acquiring this piece for 2.4 million. In the meantime, the very day, again, these 4 buildings sit on I-15 in Ogden, right off, 20 minutes north of Salt Lake City. Lease signs up on the building, and the very next day, same thing. U.S. Air Force contractor, Terracon Environmental, Zoom Technologies. I had all these calls flowing, and this building had been for sale for years. Again, empty, homeless shelter, like people living in it. And it was pretty scary for acquisitionists to come in when they have homeless people sleeping on the floor and the flushers had been the flushers of the toilets had been stolen. Kind of looking at these undervalued properties where they have high, I guess, facade damage, like the exterior paint looks crappy, the carpet's crappy, the interior's old, it's orange and blue, it's got flies, it smells like homeless shelter city, right? There's pizza on the floor and people sleeping on the floor. But because in my previous life I'd done construction, so much of it, commercial, residential, underground, it was pretty easy to see past the lipstick opportunity, meaning I could put lipstick on this pig fairly easy, paint the exterior, tear down the giant trees. So one of my good buddies in Kentucky, his name's Troy Turner. His family's really they own millions of square feet of commercial assets. And he says, dude, we buy these old buildings. He was buying like Kroger's and Smith's and things like that. They'd tear down all the old landscaping and put in new. They'd paint the exterior and put new LED lighting on the exterior. And they'd put baby brand new landscaping in. And, when you're dealing with a block building or a brick building or a masonry building, paint and new lighting and new landscaping, you don't know if that building's 100 years old or brand new. Sometimes you may have to change the windows to get them a little bit more current. I try not to do that. If there's ways to just do some updates and maybe you can put some film on the glass to make it feel like it's newer, and then have the metals painted and so forth. So that way it just feels new, right? And then you go on the inside, I go in, change the flooring, put LED lighting, paint the walls, and change every switch and outlet to new outlets and switches, because a lot of them are like that old bone color that's been outdated for years. And I just bring everything current. Paint the ceilings black, as you can see. This building's 1971 that I'm sitting in. From the outside or the inside, everything's modern in here, and you would never know, right? So they walk in, they're like, man, when did you guys build this? I'm like, well, it was built in 71. But it's a block building, right? So this is that one piece of property. Same thing happened. That building came in at over a $16 million value prior to close. Fully occupied prior to close. So where is the whole, saying of location, location, location? It does matter for a few different reasons. One is, what is the visibility to get your tenants? 2, what is the opportunity for tenants? Like, what is the business, what's business doing in that area? And then really that's the main thing. And then of course comparisons matter.
Yep. So I have a few questions from here. Interesting stories, interesting home runs, right? So you have done it different times again and again. Somebody who's like, let's say, trying to do it for the very first time, just like what you did back in the day, apart from the due diligence period, okay, so you got LOI written in such a way where you can get out no cost. But the interesting story here is, how did you turn it around? How did you find your tenants, right? Because the underlying real asset, apart from the asset itself, is the tenants.
Yeah, 100%. When I look for these real estates, I look for properties that have been for sale for a long time, because it gives you opportunity for negotiation. If properties have sat vacant and have been for sale for quite a while, that gives you huge opportunity. And there's a couple different ways to look at assets in the commercial, industrial, flex space. A lot of these big buildings are owned by large single tenant holders. Let's say one of them that we bought is an old Yum Corporation office building, Yum Corp. That building particularly, it's a single tenant. It was bought by a REIT that only specializes in single tenant occupants. So it's 180,000 square feet on 15 acres. They bought this property for a medical user, and it was single tenant. So their covenant in their REIT is that they do it for single tenant, large user space on long term leases. Well, they bought this property in the middle of COVID, and this property and the medical clinic never came to fruition. Well, now they're outside of covenant and can't really demise the building into multiple tenant, right? So if I can find a Fortune 500, for example, or single tenant users, they don't want to be landlords. They want to be, Murphy Door, or they want to be Young. They don't want to be a manager of real estate. So if I can look for large single user buildings that are being sold by the user to be put back into the space, they've depreciated that building out. They want it off their books. They're not trying to lease it. And if it's been for sale a long time, I'm sure that people have noticed this building's for sale, and is like, for you, for example, drive by and say, hey man, that'd be really cool if I could lease some office space in there, but it only says for sale. How would I lease space in a for sale building? I'm not ready to buy 180,000 square feet, but I could sure use 2,500 square feet. So what happens when you take that for sale sign down, I go right to the same realtor that had it listed and say, hey, now put that building up for lease. Here's my permission from the seller. Of course, that realtor's involved anyway, so they understand it. I let them know they have to put it up for lease that very next day. It's got to you'll put it on LoopNet, Crexy, all those different platforms, and get it up so everybody's aware that it's available. And then if you have a really good realtor, he'll put a blast out there and let other realtors know that now that property is available for lease, that we'll do tenant improvements, we'll put budgets together for it, or that they can come in and do their own TIs for a diminished rent rate, right? And the other thing that I've done is I've done really aggressive first year leasing. So let's say the rent average in an area is $15 a square foot, or annualized. I'll come in and say, hey, I'll do it $8 a square foot the first year. All I'm trying to do is get 50% of the building to cover my nut costs. So if I can then have the other 50% of the building create my margin, that's great. It doesn't always work out exactly, but that's the goal, right? So if I can get 50% of the building occupied, and if I'm $8 a square foot for Ray, $9 a square foot for Bill, $10 a square foot, just to try to get stuff moved and be a pretty good value on the first year, then I do escalations. So let's say it's a 5-year lease. I'll go $8 the first year, $9, $10, and then I pick up my gap, 15, 17, 19. So I let you know, say, hey, look, Ray, I'm going to give you a hell of a deal on the front. I'm going to make up my average of $15 a square foot over 5 years. So that way you can get in, get stabilized, get moved in, get cheap rent roll, and then you get the steep escalations on the back when you're more stable.
But here's the challenge that I'm envisioning about it, right? So I'm looking, let's say, at a building which needs help. Now, the seller is selling it at a discount because that needs help for two reasons. One, maybe they are out of business, they don't want to use that building anymore. But the second reason was that building needed help in all sorts and forms. Now, when you put it up for lease, what are you telling your tenants? Because the building still looks bad and ugly. It hasn't been put the lipstick on yet.
A good way to put it, it's called a deferred maintenance, right? So there's a lot of deferred maintenance in these type of properties. So what I do is I'll get somebody, an architect friend of mine who I've used for years, just on my own resident. By the way, when I say used for years, he's a good friend of mine. And whenever I needed a little dumb thing, he'd draw it. So don't make it, when I say I've used for years, it's not like I've done thousands of plans. I'm just like, hey, Bill, will you draw me a deck? Hey, Bill, will you do this? So then I had him do facades, like renders of what this building could look like. Mm-hmm. So I sell them on the vision, like, hey, here's the inside, here's this. And another way to do this, so let's say, Ray, you came to me and said, hey, I really want this building. This is what I need this office space to look like. This is what I need it to be inside. So you have to do some tenant improvements inside. So what I would negotiate with you, because let's say I have no money, right? Like back to this first building, I say, that's awesome, I appreciate it. There's two ways to do it. One, you can do it, and I'll give you a discounted, even steeper discounted rent rate, right? For the first little while. I can pay for it, but I'm going to have to charge you, and then I'm going to put interest at 12% on top of whatever I'm improving. So if your rent rail's $8 a square foot and you have 2,500 square feet and you're asking me to put 50,000 in, I'm going to divide that 50,000 up by your square footage and stack it into the rent roll to pay me back over 12 to 24 months. Right. So that's how I did it. And I, fortunately, on all my buildings, I've had my tenants opt in to do their own TI. So that way their rent roll didn't go up. So they'd pay for their own tenant improvements. I gave them carte blanche. I just had to approve their plans and say, yes, that's incongruent with what I'm looking for in the building. And then they had chose, because my costs, were more expensive than what they felt like they could do it for, plus the charge of my interest that I put on the money that I'm putting into the tenant improvements, that they chose to do their own TIs. So I've been lucky enough to do that. Now on the exterior, we get nervous. I'm a very much do it myself kind of guy. So I end up renting like a scissor lift or a snorkel lift, and I will go out and go to Sherwin-Williams, and I'll pressure wash the exterior of the building or sandblast, whatever I need to do in certain areas. And then I'll paint the building myself. I'll just do the exterior paint myself. I do have a contractor's license. I do a lot myself. So for the cost of paint, even this giant building, this first one that I painted to make sure that the one that we were occupying, I was in paint like $2,500. So yeah, it's a little bit of money, but it's not something you can't borrow from friends, families, or fools, right? So you can say, hey, look, give me $2,500. My rent roll comes in 2 months. I'll pay you $2,800 to get the paint. And then the same kind of thing, just back and forth. In the fire world, fortunately, everybody has second jobs. So I could get my firefighter buddies that were electricians, firefighter buddies that were plumbers, and say, hey, look, I'm going to come help me do this. I'll buy the beer and steak. You help me put this stuff together. And they do it, right? Because it's kind of a fire family. So that's a little bit of that bridge to get to your start. But I think there's so many times, and I had a podcast yesterday. It wasn't a podcast, it was actually Forbes. So I was in an interview with Forbes. And like I said, a lot of people like to put hurdles in their way. I don't do that. I'm a solutionary guy. I'm like, how do I get it through? There's always hurdles. Then I look at different opportunities of ways to get it done through my friends, through my family. How can I get this opportunity the right way, finished and go across the finish line? So I don't look pessimistically at any property. Like I said, when there's homeless people laying on the floor, I'm like, those guys are easy to move out. This is missing. I mean, they literally stole the P traps off urinals, Ray. So they couldn't even flush the toilet, but they'd still use the toilet. It's like, that's gross, you guys. I mean, but anyway, we can't think of how their mindset is. So in a lot of these different aspects, we can find reasons on not to do. I very much start a building purchase as excited. I do go through the step process of trying to disqualify the building purchase. What are all the reasons not to buy it? But I've also done the math saying, what is the high end opportunity? What is my break even point? What's the lift? And is the risks or the difficulty worth disqualifying the property, or do the pros outweigh the cons? And if the pros outweigh the cons, then I just go ahead. And when you're talking about properties these sizes, it's not very hard to go, hey, $2.4 million purchase with a $16 million valuation when fully occupied to justify a $200,000 loan from a neighbor. Does that make sense? I can come back and say, hey, look, this is my occupied rent roll. Here's the tenants that I already have agreeing to lease from me. My positive cash flow allows repayment to you within 12 months. I will pay you 12% interest on 200,000, which is one of the deals I said I partly hard money loan on the first one. That's how I did that. So it was a few $100,000 deal. He made 12% on his money. And then when I had my rent roll come in and I got the reappraisal, then I got my money out of the bank, I was able to pop it to him.
But how are you financing the deal when it's deferred maintenance? I think borrowing hard money, yeah, I mean, you can do it here and
You
there.
can finance it right with the bank. You bring up the deferred maintenance and you can bring that into the initial loan. And that's what we've done every time. So we come in and say, hey, this needs a roof. It's $80,000, right? Part of that 90-day due diligence and 120-day LOI gives you 90 days to bring in, professionals to come and give bids. And I take that with a grain of salt because everybody's trying to find work. But I look at the thing as like, is this leaking? Is this absolutely deferred? Is this something that can wait till I get some rent roll into play? I'll put the money together. Unfortunately, on the absolutes that need to happen to pass inspections, the bank, you can say, hey, here's the bids. Here's my rent rolls. They're not adverse to that. They have had no problems. This other building I bought for 3 million or 2.4 million, excuse me. I was able to add $1.5 million into the build out. So I borrowed 4.9 million into this initial purchase. That
Got
makes
it.
sense. And they were fine with it because I had such a stack of great tenants, and the rent roll was positive 80,000 a month. Right? It's like, look, yeah, no problem. We're going to give you that 1.5 million into the purchase price. And I want you guys to keep in mind when I say I bought this with firefighter credit score. Like, as long as the paper and really your tenants are the qualifying factor. And I think when we've only worked inside the single family residence or our single family dwelling, they're reliant heavily on us and our credit score and our history. When you're talking about commercial real estate, your tenants who qualify.
And absolutely, and that's the reason I said the tenants are your assets, right? So you are actually buying the tenants, which in turn helps you buy the.
Building. Yep, and that's why we do that for at least for the first 90 days on a long extended LOI, getting highly qualified tenants to stabilize the balance sheet. So when you're going to the banks through these processes, you're like, here's the solidification of the debt. I've got X, Y, and Z tenant, and here's their payment.
So did you have to put any kind of a personal guarantee on the loan, or was it truly commercial?
No, so the first one I did, yes, I did do personal guarantees. Now, what they call DSR loans or non-recourse debt, we don't do those anymore. But when you do your first ones, you're going to have to put your name up to it, right? Where they don't have any history. So my credit score at the time was in the low 700s, I believe, and no experience. And I had no real personal assets, right? I had my single family house, a Dodge pickup, and my wife had a car, right? So it was like we didn't have a bunch. So personal guarantees really didn't weigh much. And in the aspect of being able for them to come after me, a few $100,000 house and so on. So I think it's kind of funny that they want personal guarantees when there's no real asset on the back end, outside of them knowing that they can come after you and you have that weight a little bit on your shoulders to bear that if you don't make this work, they're going to come after you. So once I was able to get that debt, it's no longer sitting on a personal guarantee. None of my properties are PG, but I've been able to find the right lenders that work in non-recourse based on balance sheets or based off tenants, right?
So when they are looking at from a financing standpoint, what's the loan to value looking like?
So it's based off your rent roll. You're going to get anywhere from 65 to 75% DSR, or
Mm.
debt service ratio. You can push it a little bit if they see upside. I personally like to get to close with sub 50 DSR.
And how are you financing the other 50?
I'm not, right? So what I mean by DSR is whatever your rent rolls look like. So let's say your rent rolls are 80. They're going to take that number, $80,000 a month, if that's your net operating income. And I'll kind of walk you through this so you guys can see it on how this works. So just to teach people how they're doing it on your screen, right? That's just a normal calculator. You'll take $80,000 a month, and that would be your net operating income, which means that my rent rolls like 92, right? But there's some other costs that we tie to it, the property management costs and so on. We take that number, that's monthly net operating income, times that by 12. That's your annual net operating income. You divide that by your cap rate in your area. So let's say, and cap rates differ. Who's your tenant? Like if you get a government tenant, you're going to be in the 4.5, 5 cap, or Starbucks. If you're Murphy Door or you're somebody like us, you're going to get more like a 6.5 cap as your tenant. If you're going to get ABC Plumbing that started last week, you might get a 9 cap. The higher the cap, the lower the value of the property. So keep that in mind. It's the divisionary number of the net operating income. So let's say, just for simple factors, we're going to go 0.065. That means it's 6.5% interest rate. That means that building's worth 14,279,000 or 769,000. I'm going to times that by 50%. That means the bank would do a 50% DSR up to 700 or $7,384,000, right? And I bought this property for 4. So if you had that cap rate and that rent roll here at a 50% DSR, the bank will let you take 7,300,000 and some odd thousand dollars based on your leases at a 50. They'll go up. to 65 or 80. Now, the cool part is what happens to that $3 million? Goes back into your pocket and it's net tax free. It's a tax free injection. You don't pay taxes on debt. So the reason I keep it at a DSR is if I lose half my tenants, I still am covering my nut, right? If you go up into that higher risk 75% DSR deal, you're losing a quarter of your tenants and you're coming out of pocket. So there's a unique thing here that I think a lot of people get confused with when it comes to real estate. Everybody is like, oh, the interest rate's too high. Well, here's the cool part about high interest rate. When people, I mean, this can be a long part of conversation, but I'm going to put that number back in to the best of my memory. 7.3 million. That was like 14 million. Let's just call it 14,500,000 on that rent roll. Right. That was it. And we divided by 0.065 and it came to 7,300,000. Well, let's say now interest rates are 0.4% or at 4%, right? Now that building, oh, excuse me, that was not the right number. It was 960,000 was the annual rent roll divided by 0.04. Now that's 4% interest. Now your building's worth 24 million. When interest rates drop, you picked up another 10 million in value. Here's the negative side. This buyer bought it 4%. When he bought it, it was worth 24 million. Most commercial loans are 5 to 7 year balloons on a 20-year amortization. So now here he goes 5 years later. They bought this building in 2020. 5 years later, it's time to refinance. They put 25% down on 24 million, which means they put 6 million down. They have $18 million debt. And most of the time, that first 5 years, you're not really hitting principal very hard. Now they come back, interest rates worth, let's call it 6.5%. That building's worth $14 million. They have to come to close on a refinance with $4 million because the value of the property, strictly on interest rate alone going up, devalued their property 10 million. Now the borrower, in order to keep the building, has to hit leather for $4 million. That's the risk of low interest environments. The benefit of high interest environments is these buildings come to play. So then you buy it at a high interest value. As long as your net operating income covers the debt service, I don't give two craps if interest is 12%. If I can get 50% of my occupants to pay my net operating income, or my not, excuse me, to pay my COG, my nut, then I don't care what interest rate really is. The only thing that can happen is when interest rates drop, my property values go up. So I'm stealing the building at these high interest rate environments from companies that couldn't come up to the table with this high leather impact. So the banks get a hold of it, and I'm picking up these assets. For example, the one in Michigan, 430,000, just under square feet, 55 acres. It fully occupies $140 million at current rent rate over there. And we got it from the bank for $6 million. The bank on 55 acres. Without the building on the property's worth 10 million without the building, just the lot.
Just a lot. I mean, 55 acres, and you can do so much. It's a land bank, right?
It's a land bank. So, but not only that, here's the deal. It sat there. We've had this property. We're closing on August 15th. We have now, this is the great part, that we bought that building at $13 a square foot, roughly 14 bucks. I currently have 75,000 square feet of that building leased at $15 triple net, right? So do the math. Debt service on $6 million. Let's just use 6,000 as easy math per million. So that's $36,000 for your payment. And that's high. It's a little bit less than that. So if we have 75,000 square feet at $15 on my triple net, that right there generates $1,125,000 in rent roll annually. I have total rent cost at $420,000, right? And then they're participating in the power, water, gas, electrical taxes in their square footage leased. So not only before we close, I'm generating $600,000 in positive cash flow with an additional 360,000 square feet of building to lease.
Yep.
and that building is free. I mean, I'm not free. Well, it's a free building. Actually, we bought it for $6 million and got $360,000 to close. The building appraised at $24 million, so we had to come to the table with $0. It was literally a deed transfer.
So you got two home runs there.
Yeah, I got a check at closing. I got a deed transfer. I got the bank to carry the same note. It was a walk in the park.
Yep. This is amazing based on different podcasts that I've done, and I hear different strategies and things on the residential side and how people are scared of commercial work, especially because the interest rates are kind of high. And then on the note standpoint, you are always kind of refinancing. But what you're doing in this high interest rate market and creating value for yourself, and you're right, and when once the interest rates kind of go down.
Refinance again, $2 million out, tax free. Go build, play Monopoly. Go build the next building. You've got 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, $30 million in tax free money to go play Monopoly and buy the next big building, and then buy the next big building. This is something that Grant Cardone, I've had the opportunity to get to know him well and his team. Is like, dude, I love this high interest world, and I'm like, I can't. We've been taught to love low interest rate worlds. He's changed my programming to love high interest rate worlds. It's been a huge learning lesson, and all I can say is my net worth has changed, has magnified immensely ever since he was able to pivot my mindset on how I'm looking at environments.
I do primarily short-term rentals, and I'm of the same way right now. I'm like, this is the buying time, right? So it's high interest rate because on the single family side, the notes are 30 years amortized and 30-year note. The opportunity is only to go down. It can never go up on me for next 30 years. And if the value is increasing on the appreciation side, now residential, as you know, is kind of valued differently. But as the value kind of goes up, the opportunity for the loan cost is only to go down because I don't have to refi even if the interest goes to, let's say, to 20%.
Yeah, great. Right.
The only time I'm going to refi is when it goes down. But this other side of the equation is with the single family homes is that you cannot score as many or as big of a home run as what you're doing with commercial.
So there's a couple different things on your short term rentals. Like I have, like I said, 6 of those plus my hotel. Plus, I mean, we'll have 150 some odd coming up here. They're not my favorite for the. It is a great way to secure money a little bit, right? It's safer money. Well, I wouldn't even. It is safer. I'll say that. But there's two things you really can't dictate. One, you don't have the horsepower to change values very well. You do not. It's not in your hands. I love the opportunity to be able to increase the property value to whatever level I put forth effort into, pretty much. Like if I can get a tenant to rent for me at $35 a square foot instead of $20 a square foot annualized because I've turned it into a class A building for a couple $1,000,000. Now all of a sudden I've increased the value 10 million. You can't do that in a house. And one other thing that I want people to realize is it's just as hard to get a residential mortgage, sometimes harder, than a commercial debt. Commercial banks move quicker, they're easier. Yeah, you may have to do an ALTA survey and an environmental and then you know what I mean? You may have to do a bunch of little things that are new to you. You're going to still do the same building inspections and so forth. But the banks have a lot more security, especially when you're bringing tenants. They're not qualifying just you like they are your house, with potentially making, let's say, a good long-term rent. You're going to make $1,000 a month, maybe. But then after a year, you're going to replace the carpet, paint some stuff, fix the dishwasher, dispose all, and so on. On a commercial building, I just make sure the roofs don't leak, the mechanical's in good shape, mow the lawns, shovel the driveways if I have to, or whatever. I should say plow the driveways because they're big. But in the meantime, that's really the obligation of the landlord. The inside of the building, hey, the tenant calls up and say, hey, the carpet's bad. Okay, cool. Go change your carpet. Hey, I need to repaint this wall. Sweet. Repaint your wall. I need to change these light bulbs. Cool. Go change your light bulbs. Right?
And there's another aspect to it. Not only that, even though you are doing, like I think the common area maintenance charges kind of roll back to the tenants, right? At the end of the year with the triple net needs. So actually what you're netting is the pure net out of it.
Correct.
So even though on the front end it looks like that you did the repair, what you're doing is you're just assigning somebody to do it.
You're correct.
But from a cost standpoint, And from a whole lot of gazillion laws that you are bound with this residential market, you don't have all those on the commercial side.
at all. So we make very clear leases that say, hey, look, I just did the asphalt. We repaved and striped the asphalt this week. It was $100,000. Well, let's just for simple case matter say it's 100,000 square feet. It's just shy. That means that when we do the year-end trip, CAM fees, every person's going to be charged $1 a square foot for their occupancy amount. So if you occupy 50,000 of this property, you're paying $50,000 towards the asphalt, even though it's our asset. But any of this kind of maintenance get tied to the leases. Maintenance, new landscaping. I put in a whole bunch of new landscaping this year because some of it got fried. The waters were bad, so we ended up doing it. Replaced. Guess who pays for it? Everybody on the occupancy, so which you don't get that opportunity to demise the cost out to your tenants in residential markets. So it's one of those deals that I really consider. Now, here's the other beauty that I love about commercial and industrial flex space. I mean, I'm not a big retail fan yet. I haven't played in the market, so I can't. I'm sure there's plenty of successful people in that world, but I'm nervous with it based on brick and mortar games that we are seeing happen. But what I love about it is there's not very many people playing. So everybody's a real estate investor in residential. Everybody. You go to the fire station, half the people are residential. I'm a real estate investor. I'm like, yeah, I guess if that's what you want to call yourself. But at the end of the day, when you go get into commercial, like you've got in Utah, what Weber County area, you've got 12 players. In residential, you got 12 players in the same freaking room that has 20 people sitting in it, right?
In residential, you're dealing with these small little things, and it takes time and energy out of you. I mean, you can hire a property manager, but it's still your property, right? So, for example, anything that tenant finds wrong at your property for small little thing, they kind of come back to you.
Mm-hmm.
But
The
with
same 8 hours
commercial,
a day that we get the same 8 hours.
yeah, exactly. So we get the same 8 hours. Now you can work on something, for example, like you can work at McDonald's and make those $10 an hour, or you can work at somewhere else or be your own boss and make thousands of dollars per hour, right? So that value of time, where how the people are kind of draining your time out of you, your time and energy on the residential side versus commercial. I mean, this is awesome.
Think about this. Your home is your home and you're passionate for it. So when something goes wrong, you're going to call the landlord for every little thing because it's not perfect. The difference, and you're passionate, right? You're passionate, it's your home, whether you're the renter or the whatever. But with businesses, when you're dealing with commercial and industrial and that kind of stuff, most people that are even leasing my space don't work in this building. They're working in Washington, D.C., and Atlanta, and like their offices are over there. The people that give two craps about this building that are paying the bill, the people that are here, they just work here. If there's a roof leak, they don't even call you generally, right? They're like, oh, there's drips. How come you didn't tell me? Oh, I didn't know who to call. You know what I mean? Well, call me because it's causing more damages than I wanted to cause. But I mean, they really don't have the passion for it. They don't live there. They don't really care. Like, what's wrong? We do a really good job, if you saw the cameras outside, of maintaining the property and making sure it stays pretty and up to a beautiful space to pull into. But at the same time, the people on property don't really care. They're not the ones writing the check.
So, Jeremy, in your buildings, what kind of tenants, like, I'm sure that just like the area we say A, B, and C, so tenants have some kind of a classification. So, what kind of classification does the tenants have, and generally, what kind of tenants are you bringing in?
So it depends on the property. The one down, we'll use Utah for example. The one down in the industrial park, that is like flooring, drywall. They're big drywall suppliers and flooring suppliers. So they're using the rail spur to bring in train loads of drywall that they then store inside the building. Flooring, same thing. All their floor actually comes from Atlanta. Like the flooring suppliers, Mohawk.
Yeah.
So they're right out of Atlanta. They bring it in by rail. They store it inside the buildings, and then they distribute it to their wholesalers. I also have like a realtor brokerage firm, and I've basically done a mixed use. So what I love to do when I buy these type of buildings, if I can buy industrial, they're the most lenient on kind of their stuff that can happen there, right? You can do some commercial, you can do some flex, you can do heavy industrial, light industrial. It gives you a pretty good open. I look at properties that are very demisable. So let's say you got a big block building that's sitting there and you could use it for warehouse one, or I could put a wall in the middle and split it into two offices, put a garage door, and then make it a plumber's office or electrician's office. I mean, I try to make it as malleable to whatever kind of tenant I could possibly attract. Keep in mind, I'm not just looking for you to rent from me. I'm looking for somebody that is my tenant, that is good quality paper, because you've got to be careful on your tenant. It will change the cap rate. Again, the value of your property based on the quality of the tenant changes the cap rate, the multiple, or the divisionary number of your net operating income. And these are all going to sound Chinese to some of your listeners. You're just going to need to watch some YouTube videos and understand cap rate and understand NOI. Once it clicks, it clicks. It doesn't make sense why when cap rates are at 9, it's worth less than if they're at 4 until you understand it. It took me a long time to wrap my head around. Like, I don't get it. It's a cap rate at 9. That's excellent. I mean, it's great for the buyer. It's terrible for the seller, right?
Yep.
You want to be selling at a low cap. You want to be buying at a high cap,
Yep.
which means buying at a high interest rate valuation or high divisionary number, and then selling at a low divisionary number because it's net operating divided by, not a multiple of. And that's the secret with cap rates.
Absolutely. No, cap rates has a lot of power. That 1 percentage point has a lot of power, right? So
Crazy. Like 5,000 a month divisionary. I mean, you go back $5,000 a month and you take that and times it by 12 and divide it by 4% or divide it by 8%. It's an insane amount of money that your building asset changes. So that's what I love about these commercial pieces, is because, like with a house, let's say you buy a house that's like 800,000 square feet, right? And then now, or $600,000 to $800,000, excuse me, I'm thinking commercial. But then you really are stuck like waiting for appreciation to occur. You're stuck, just on little thing on your comparisons, hoping the interest rates go down. With this, I can really take a $600,000 asset, change the tenant class, wait for interest rates to go down, and it's worth 1.8. That's the game.
awesome, awesome. Now that's a lot of knowledge that you have shared, Jeremy. So what's next? So 2025, 2026. What's next? What's the upcoming projects?
We'll close in 2025 on this other property in Michigan. We've got that other one in Kentucky all wrapped up. We'll have those. I'm hoping to have them majority occupied. Both of those have tenants enough to cover the nut. I'm trying to wrap up getting as much of that occupied as possible. What I'm hoping for by the year 2028 is to have 1 million square feet of real estate in the commercial world. 2030, I have a goal of like $1 billion in assets in commercial real estate outside of Murphy Door, Murphy Ladder, Pure Brand, and my other holdings. That's kind of the goal on the real estate play. It's really enticing. It was honestly, what's interesting to me is, I mean, Murphy Door is a fairly big company now and well known. I thought that would be where all the money was going to be coming from. Like, when you're starting Murphy Door, that's where you're going to make your wealth. And what was interesting inside this is that it's not at all where the money's coming from. It is good money, don't get me wrong, but the magnitude of opportunity in real estate is dynamically different. And what's really great about that is my real estate piece. Yes, it doesn't bring in as much on the top line annual revenue as Murphy Door, but Murphy Door has over 100 people working, and it has tons of occupied square footage of space that you have to maintain, and equipment and machinery and all this crap. Real estate in my realm with that much square footage is just me.
Yep.
Is just me. Like, I have and hire property managers like that are subcontracted. So I'm just paying subcontract horizontally integrated vendors that aren't mine, that don't work full time, that I'm not dedicated to paychecks, that I only use when I need them, right? Mow my lawn once a week. That's when I use them. Plow my driveway when it needs it. Do this for my landscaping, so on, which is crazy to me that we are 8 hours. Like, I can be, and being honest with you guys, I spend maybe 8 hours a week on real estate. Maybe. I come in every morning and I get on Crexy and LoopNet and I look for these white elephants, meaning giant buildings that are unoccupied, owned by a single tenant, and not just owned by end user, that are highly demisable, undervalued, basically depreciated to the end, been for sale for a while. We built an app on ChatGPT that crawls Crexy and crawls LoopNet and looks for these little things I'm looking for. I look personally for nothing less than like 100,000 square feet. And then I look at where's the location. So I just have it crawl and it kicks me out a whole bunch of lists every morning. I go in, I'm like, yep, nope, yep, nope, yep, yep, nope, 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 like a whole bunch of things I don't like. And then I just spend a few minutes and then I run some quick math and I look at the economic environments of that area. If it matches the opportunities there to get the valuation that I need, then I'll kick LOIs out there like crazy. I send LOIs like, are they willing to let me have a 90-day due diligence period and a 120-day closing period and then let me put it up for lease tomorrow? Some people don't. And if they don't, I'm not in. Like, I'm just trying to offset some of the risk by letting me find tenants prior to entrance. So I won't buy a building, period, if I cannot get a tenant before I buy it and get it to pay my nut. I won't do it. I don't need negative cash flow. As good as that building may look, if I can't get that building for lease during my due diligence period, I won't do it because it's empty. So I have to look at like Grant's method, 85 to 90% occupied. And I have to look at my method, 0% occupied, but getting the occupants prior to close offsets the risk portfolio, right? So that's the only way I'll buy and the only way I'll play. And then to your initial question, Ray, how do you get banks to fund the repair, the deferred maintenance, so forth? Leases,
The tenants, yeah.
leases.
Well, those leases, yeah, absolutely. So no, this makes all lot of sense. This is great, Jeremy. I really appreciate you joining, giving us this time, and sharing this wealth of knowledge, especially this, value of time and forced appreciation that you can make in the commercial world in this high interest market, which everybody is scared of. So finding opportunities in this market.
Yep. And Ray, for just advice to you, you're spending more time in residential than I am in commercial, and you will have a higher return on investment on your time.
Well, so no, this is great. Anything else, Jeremy, that you want to share before?
No, no, I love it. I would like to hear a little bit more on your how long have you been playing in the short term rental stuff?
2019 is when I first started. So it had started by accident. So I had a basement which we were never using, brought in a tenant just so that no squatters kind of come into my basement. So I just wanted like a security system. So the tenant kind of find another place for himself to live on, but I already installed all the furniture for him because he wanted me to furnish. He was moving from Chicago. Then I hired somebody to help me list this thing on Airbnb, and it started producing more money than what I was expecting. I was expecting like $700 a month just so that somebody is there. But I started making like 15, 16. I'm like, okay, so this little basement, I did nothing to it, right? It had all the old furniture, everything that I thought is extra for us. And we were like either outdated or extra before, into all those different movings, graduating from apartments to like the first single family home. All that stuff was there in the basement. Then I started improving, and then COVID hit. So COVID, anyways, the Airbnb, it was a boom time for Airbnbs. Guests started coming in, they started giving me positive feedback. I started improving, and at the same time, I started learning about how this whole thing works. It got me interested. Then I bought some single family homes which had tenants. As the tenants would move out, I'll convert them to short-term rentals. So, all in a nutshell, during this process, I ended up with right now I have like 6 or 7 short-term rentals. Now they produce money. So, what I like about short-term rental is they produce more money than long-term rentals. But what I like is,
Especially in residential, right?
especially in residential, right? Yeah. So yeah. But now I'm coming to the point where can I expand the portfolio? Yes. It checks a few check boxes, right? It gives me the cash flow. The properties are nicer. There's almost zero deferred maintenance because anytime there is a small little thing that happens, we go either the guest tells us or my cleaner tells us or we look at it. So somebody notifies. And the moment we get notified, we fix it because these are short-term rentals. These are not no longer long-term rentals, right? Because in long-term rentals, your tenants sometimes they won't even tell you about these things for years. In short-term, that does not happen. But what I don't like about this thing is, as you rightly said, I mean, and what I mentioned to you is the value of time. I feel like that my energy gets sucked into this today. Just maintaining that turnover. The guest is coming in, the guest is moving out. Can we give this to a property manager and then do it? Absolutely, we can do that.
You take a huge hit on your top line.
Exactly. That's one. And then two is then how do you grow? Because now you have given that profit to somebody else to do it. Whereas in these resident in this market, let's say a property manager is going to charge me 15%, right? I'm being on the conservative side. But that 15% is a margin.
You're right.
Essentially, then what was I doing? I'm basically paying the mortgage and I'm paying somebody else the profit.
And I'm getting nothing.
You're getting all the risk.
Yeah. So you know what's funny is I in real estate, my hotel piece, like those average, it's up in the middle of nowhere. It's an older hotel that I bought with the plans to tear it down to
Uh-huh.
put in this 153 unit condo that started construction already, and it's like a 130 to 150 dollar a night hotel. This is not nice hotel. This is 1970 vacation area in Utah hotel, right? This is not nice. So it's a cheap. That's why it's 130 to 150 bucks a night. It's called the Pinnacle in Flaming Gorge. If you look it up, it's not a nice place. Now I spend hands down dynamically more time on this 130 to 150 dollar a night hotel to hear about people saying there's flies, there's a moth, there's this. I saw a mouse. I mean, we are in the middle of recreational outdoor Utah. Of course, there's coyotes. Of course, there's deer in your property. They're just there. Well, whatever. Like, what do you want me to say? And they want, hey, this room's different than the other room that I saw on Airbnb because all 21 are listed. It has a different comforter. It has a different coffee maker. The stove's not the same. It has full kitchens in it. And I'm like, my hell, like I would much rather not even deal with these complaints. Like my opinion is I'd much rather deal with a high value phone call that people are paying me 25, 30, 50,000 a month in rent in these commercial spaces. When you call about a light bulb, it doesn't hurt my feelings. I'm wanting to get this thing fixed right now because you're a big tenant to me. But when you're calling about flies that have come in the door that you left open, I don't know what you want me to come swat flies for you. Like this is an asinine call. But again, so it's not that they're wrong. I'm not trying to make fun of the tenant or whoever they are, like the nightly stay person. But it's just like, to your point of value of time, is this really where we want to spend our time in something that doesn't make money? At the end of the day, I might make $15 a day net on that stupid room if I'm lucky. And to deal with the stress times 21 people every night, it's fully occupied right now. Like there's not even place to park. It's full. And it's just annoying. Yeah, this guy parked in front of my room. This guy, I'm like, okay, they're not assigned parking. I don't know what to tell you. Ask him kindly to move if you want to be more conveniently parked in front of the room. I don't. What do you want me to do? You know what I mean? So it drives me batty. Like you said, the time gets eaten.
Absolutely. So last few months, I've been thinking, where do I pivot from here? Right. So you built a portfolio for yourself. It's working. It's great, but I don't think this is a model that you can scale. Let's say from 10 to 100 units. Maybe you can, but then the quality will go down because they even if you hire a company, they're not going to manage the properties the way you are managing them.
Sure.
And in this market, the quality is everything, especially for Airbnbs and things like that.
My suggestion would be you hire an assistant.
I did hire assistant, but I think I'm trying to pivot from this industry altogether.
Yeah.
And
A lot in the Airbnb world.
yeah, I mean, I'll still hold on to this portfolio,
Sure.
but do I want to keep adding on to this portfolio?
Yeah.
And the other thing was, when you first start, sometimes you don't know what you're doing and you just get started with whatever is thrown to you, right? Or what opportunities exist at the time. Now that my knowledge curve and my cash flow curve and everything has kind of matured a little bit. So,
You're more lendable.
yeah, so it's more like, what else can I do with the same amount of time, right?
Yeah.
What is the value of time? So, how can I force my time to be a better producing from a value standpoint rather than just dealing with this crap? Because even if you hire assistant does help to a certain degree, but then it again kind of trickles down or to you.
The way I look at assistants is their task. They're task based. They're
Yes.
not line thinking. They're handling the task. Like call the cleaner, order some more toilet paper, order this, get that, do the sheets, go double check that. It's just the low value time, and it's not that they're low value. I would just assign things that take time away from your high value activity.
Yep.
They're low value tasks with a high cost to your time.
Yep. So figure out in a day what are the activities that you're doing, and if you were to assign it some kind of a value, if I was to outsource it, what's the value of that task? And anything that's, look at it from a descending order, and you keep the up top, but try to assign everything that's
You've
down.
seen Steve Jobs' signal action.
No.
So he has this bar chart that's like there's noise and there's signal.
Uh,
And he has like 100 noise actions all day, and there's 3 to 5 signals, which are high priority must completes. And so he never works on any noise, or he only works on signal, and all noise gets handled by something else. Elon Musk does that as well. I was watching, I think it was Kevin O'Leary talking about noise and signal. And he was just saying the one that has the most efficient on working on signal only is Elon Musk ever. Like he's only signal oriented. Like he works in 5-minute increments, right? So he does these really quick turnovers and has no noise. Steve Jobs, Kevin O'Leary worked for Steve, and he was talking about signal and noise, and it was a really interesting way to say what you just said. Yeah. It's a really good podcast if you see that one. It's Noise and Signal, Steve Jobs, and I think it was Kevin O'Leary talking about it.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for joining today's podcast. We really appreciate you joining with us today.
I appreciate you having me, Ray, a lot. It was fun.
And to our viewers, thanks for joining us and listening, and we'll be back next week with another podcast. So stay tuned. Thank you.